Welcome to the Center for Global Development. Welcome to this discussion, which I've really been looking forward to with two friends whom I can welcome back to the Center for Global Development. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, who is the Minister of Finance for Indonesia, and President Liqun, who is the President of the AIIB. And the topic that we want to focus on, which is what do middle-income countries, emerging market countries, want from the MDBs, the multilateral development banks. And this topic, for some of you, those of you who have been following the various events we have organized this week at CGD, will see that it fits in very much into the series of events, which are all focused around different dimensions of MDB reform. One thing that has come out in a lot of these conversations, both the public ones and the private ones, is that the discussion of how to move forward with reforming the MDBs can't just focus on the supply side, on how to raise their financing capacity, on whether or not they need more capital, but to think also about the demand side, the borrowers and the countries that these institutions are meant to serve, and really to start by asking them, what is it that they want to see from the process of reform? And we started the week, you'll remember, with a conversation that was very much focused around what Africa and low-income countries wanted to see. And today we have the privilege of being able to have a conversation about middle-income countries. And I really want to just dive right into it. And you know, I want to ask you, Sri Mulyani, to start, because not just from the point of view of Indonesia, because Indonesia itself is a big borrower from the MDB system, but you've also, last year, you were the president of the G20, and during that process, you initiated this thinking about MDB reform, and you heard a lot from your colleagues in the G20 about what they wanted. And of course, previously, you have, although it's now going back a little bit, but you were inside the MDB as the managing director of the World Bank, and so you also had contacts with clients. So as we think about this process of evolution, as it's called, of the World Bank and the other MDBs, what do you think would constitute a vision of success from the point of view of emerging markets?
Well, thank you, Masood, for this invitation, and good to be back here again. And first, I think the evolution of the MDBs as an institution, given the fact that the global economy now is showing a lot of issue on the development, is not one country own problem. You talk about global public bad or global public good, in this case, pandemic, climate change, or even in this case, the war that creating refugee and so on, that's become also a problem. So this is now the situation post-pandemic with the high inflation rate, debt problem and so on. It's creating quite a lot of complex issue for many emerging countries, not to mention low-income country, in dealing with the post-COVID as well as dealing with the many development agenda. That's on the what needs to be done globally, and for each country, it then affects in terms of their development priority. What the developing country and emerging country need from the MDBs. The MDB traditionally provide with the three very important services to the client. Loan, that is financing support, whether this is loan or grant. For the low-income country, they even combine both. And then convening power, in which many of the client country usually have the limited in terms of networking, knowing what is the best practice and so on. And the third one, which is related to that, is the knowledge. So some countries who's already, like in emerging country, Indonesia case in this case, or many other emerging countries, they've already started to diversify the source of financing, if we are talking about fiscal deficit and financing. MDB can provide that, but now they are more and more rely on bonds market, both domestic and global. But this is not a substitute in a way, because we still need to have this kind of engagement, not only in terms of the borrowing costs, although now becoming very important, the cost of borrowing with the interest rate increase very steep, we also need to have a knowledge. So for example, like in Indonesia case, and in my experience before when I am MD in the World Bank, country maybe want to reform their health system. So they are not only asking about, can you provide me with money so that I can build, for example, primary services or hospital or any medical system that need to be built, but they want to know how we are going to build this system that work, that can serve the client. Country want to reform their tax. They are not only just, okay, increasing the salary of the tax officer and then you import or apply a software and then that will be done. That's not going to happen like that. You usually have to do about what is the design of the organization, business model, governance, and all those things. Country want to reform their education system to get a better result. So these are all the MDB which can provide the complement package between financing, knowledge, and then convening by looking. The more that the MDB providing those kind of expertise is going to have a much bigger. The problem now is the MDB's limited capacity on their equity or their capital. The demand for development is continue even increasing. Now the climate change is becoming one of the biggest, of course. When everybody talked pandemic before, all the MDB responding by providing a quick lending for many of the emerging country as well as developing country for vaccine import and all those things. Now climate change, all talking about adaptation and mitigation in this case, Indonesia, we are talking about energy transition mechanism. This is one of the biggest, of course, CO2 emitter. But Indonesia have a lot of options. So the question is how we are going to design the right policy, design the right transaction that can apply and invite more private participation, and how then the MDB play a role within that context. That cannot be played by private sector financing or by public sector like our own budget. So these are all what you call it blended finance, not only in terms of the money blended, but what is the strength of each of these institutions can provide a better result and more effective collaboration. I'm sure under the current geopolitical situation, Masood, this word of collaboration and cooperation is becoming very rare, very thin, very rare to find. So this is one of the area. While on the one hand, the development issue will continue need a lot of collaboration and cooperation. And that's why the MDB role, which is now becoming even more relevant, is how this become a platform of continued collaboration and cooperation. In addition, the three traditional, as I mentioned earlier, financing, convening, and knowledge.
Great. So I'll come back to you on the energy transition, because I think there's a lot of interest in how that's going to unfold. You have a JET-B, one of the Just Energy Transition Partnerships in Indonesia. How will that, what role can MDBs play in that? And also to the last point you made, which I think is very important, which is, do we want to think about MDBs as a space within which shareholders who might otherwise have difficult relationships in a geopolitical sense, that they could collaborate on issues where collaboration is essential to solve a common problem? So I think that's an important point. Let's come back to that. But before that, I want to come to you, President Jin, and ask you the same question. You have a lot of middle-income clients from where you sit. No doubt you and they have been talking about the sort of future of AIIB, future of MDBs. What are they asking for? How much does that, what Sri Mulyani has just said, resonate? Are there any other perspectives on that?
Thank you for the question. Thank you. Welcome. I think it's a very interesting question. But let me spend a little bit more time on the conceptualization and designing of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We thought this new bank created in the 21st century should remain in the gene pool of the multilateral development banks. It should not be a completely different animal. But if it's simply a clone of the World Bank or a copy of AIIB, that doesn't make any sense for us to have a new institution. And people did ask, was it better to put the money in the existing institutions or you start a new kitchen? And my answer at that time, yes, we want to start a new kitchen because we want to cook a different kind of food to meet the different kind of tastes, right? Does not mean that this kitchen would be catering to all of the people, but at least could offer a different kind of menu. This is the idea. And then build on experience of the legacy institutions. We thought a couple of things we need to do. First of all, it must be inclusive. And we do not have part one countries, which are the donors, and part two countries, which are the borrowers. Now, that brings me to the issue of the role of middle income countries. It's interesting to note, over the last 7 decades, ever since the Bretton Woods was created, how many countries really graduated. This is a long, long education period. No educational institution would have the students staying with them for half a century or even longer, right? So the World Bank want to have them graduate, and you find as soon as some countries graduate, your quality of the assets goes down. So please wait a moment. You don't graduate. You continue your PhD program, master's program. You just stay on, right? So we need you. We need you, right? When you're all gone, we become the kindergarten or elementary school. That's a huge problem. Okay. So to a certain extent, in the legacy institutions, the middle or emerging market economies, the higher income, already play a big role. But we think we should ask them to play even bigger role. On the one hand, we need them because of the need for the quality assets. On the other hand, in my view, the successful projects implemented in the higher income countries could be a role model for lower income countries. I think this is very much important. And also you find it's interesting to note, and it's really encouraging to see that, for instance, our Gulf countries are doing quite a lot. They double down on financing for the renewables. They are sitting on the fossil fuel reserves, but they think it's urgent for them to move away from fossil fuel and to the renewables. And their experience could be very, very good for the other borrowing countries. And of course, I would say their contribution in different ways, including supporting the MDBs by contributing to some of the funds for some specific purposes. Climate change is a case in point. So there are lots of things we can do by working with the middle income members. Then when it comes to the issue of the reform of MDBs, why we are now paying a lot of attention to reform of MDBs, because the problem is the capital increase cycle about every 7 or 8 years being repeated again and again. And the MDBs would have to knock on the door of the shareholders asking for money again and again and again. So our bank tried to break away from this cycle, try to depend on our own efforts to expand its capital base. We have some thoughts about this, but whether it's going to work, only practice can give us a test. But this kind of discussion has been going on for quite some time. But this CAF review is really the most serious efforts we have ever seen over the decades. Now, what is the role of the middle-income countries, high-income countries in this role? I think perhaps we understand it's no longer feasible to depend on the OECD countries for capital support. You need to do more to mobilize resources from the emerging market economies. So in my view, in this round of discussion, we should really bring the developing countries to have them contribute their ideas. Now, the difficult part of the MDB reform is not an issue of the MDB themselves. It's more an issue of the shareholders. In a private company, it's very simple. Private company works for a single objective, profit maximization. You survive in a competition, you make the maximum profit. It's very clear, laser sharp objective. But when it comes to the MDBs, you have more than 100 shareholders. Each and every one has a different agenda. So unless the shareholders can come together and be staying on the same page with the piece of paper reducing in its size, it's very hard. Now I think when we talk about reform, it's like open up a newspaper, Financial Times or New York Wall Street Journal every day. It's a huge page. And you don't know whether you're on which page. So I think we should stay on the same page, but the size of the page is really crucial. So when we talk about the reform, it's more an issue of the shareholders rather than the management.
So, Junior, I'm going to pick that point up first, if I may, because I think President Jin's kind of squarely put the issue that, of course, management has a role to play. You've been in management, you've been a shareholder, and you can see that they both have some contribution. But at the end of the day, it's getting agreement amongst the shareholders on where you want an institution to go that will then set the frame for management to operate. And from your point of view as a shareholder now, and as also trying to build consensus among shareholders last year as the G20 presidency, how do you see that? Do you see that's easier, harder now? Are we close to building consensus right now? For example, on the World Bank reform is perhaps the most advanced discussion on that. What's your take on all of that?
Well, it has something to do with the global environment which changed. When establishing the Bretton Woods institution at that time, the shareholder, who of course I assume they know what they're doing, of course, establishing the institution is because they have one specific objective, in this case, rebuilding post-war from European situation. The world maybe at that time maybe being seen as complex, but if you compare with today, it's not that complex. One single objective, you create this institution, and this is your mandate, and that's why for the management it's easier. You get the capital, callable, and then you upsize the leverage of this capital. You provide lending to the client, which is very specific at that time. Shareholders have no differences regarding which client need to be served. Now, fast forward 70 years, the world changed. The same shareholder, or maybe additional shareholder composition changed, which one is become the biggest 5, the biggest 10 in this case. And of course, in terms of the vision regarding how this institution will serve the development agenda globally, it's also becoming so diverse. For this shareholder, one shareholder, their political constituent want this agenda A, B, C. For the other shareholder, their political constituent want to X, Y, Z. For the other, want to pay QR. That's why the multilateral development bank become like a shopping mall. Like the Financial Times from page 1 to page, I don't know how page is now.
You read it online.
Exactly. That's why we don't know which one that's. And that's why you want to have like sport, you have real estate, you want stock, you have politics, you have all those things. You name it, I give you. The management then recruited so many staff with so many missions. The client is also changing from the emerging country to become the middle income, low income. And the one who don't want to be graduated, not because of the supply side, that is the institution need them to be there, but they also think that I really don't know whether I'm going to have a crisis again or not in this case. So it's more like an insurance type. So this kind of thing is the dynamic. The problem now, I think, both the shareholder, management, and the client, they are not yet settled regarding what kind of global order that we are really in right now. whether the history can provide us a lesson so that we can guide us now and forward. And then what kind of governance decision-making process, because we pretend that the MDB is like a corporation. The shareholder, which according to the vote, will then exercise the vote and directing that one. But this is not a regular corporation like a private corporation in which you have one single objective. This is political entity, which you know, all of you who know politics, never simple. The lack of clarity is the better for politics because you have room to maneuver, which is totally in contrast with the corporate governance in which you always want to have a clarity. So this is really something in which the management act as if you are managing institution which is like corporation. You have balanced scorecard, you try to simplify process, business model, fast decision-making process. I remember when I was in the bank, there is a spaghetti decision-making process, like no one make what decision, how long, and on. That is because of the result of all this mission creep as well as this political entity as your shareholder. When you are doing something, or because a certain shareholder want that, you do this, then I will provide you with additional for the AIIB replenishment. So, within the governance structure, providing the behavior. That structure providing that kind of behavior. I wish what President Jin Liqun mentioned, that you can simplify to become a new kind of animal. I wish you luck in it.
Thank you.
I mean, that is something which is, we are all, if you were in the management, I was in the management, I know that this is the clarity. If you talk on behalf of staff, they want that clarity. But every time they start doing one clarity, then there is an additional. First, pandemic, fragile state, then climate change, and then poverty, shared prosperity, and then what else? Governance, corruption. James Wolfenson says the C word. You cannot even say the corruption at that time. Now everything is corruption.
You're right.
Yeah. So this kind of thing is just, we just put it in with the reality. While of course in this kind of institution we can talk about the ideal, but the reality is like that. So every time we have the panel expert trying to reform, you have to ask what is the foundation first, and then what is exactly the global shareholder want this institution to exist and to play a role. But if with this global institution or shareholder cannot agree, then the result is downstreaming is just the confusion. It will create another confusion at the downstream.
So I think that's a very kind of vivid and compelling picture that you have painted. And now I want to bring it down to the current issue. And I want to get both your views on it, which is the big debate is how do you get the MDBs to play a bigger role in dealing with global challenges, and the bulk of the money in a way is for climate adaptation, mitigation, and on that also not yet complete convergence amongst shareholders. So from where you sit, and now I want to bring it to the energy transition a bit, because a very specific example, you have the jet peaks where you're going through this. Other countries also want to go through some form of energy transition. How do you see the MDBs integrating this set of issues into their work? Is it just by making the focus on climate-related energy and other transition a little bit more important in a coherent country strategy, or is it by taking it on as a sort of special mission and really putting aside resources and funding to be able to make that happen? What's your vision as a client of what you would like them to do?
You ask me as a client now, yeah?
Yeah.
If you talk about the energy transition mechanism in Indonesia, then we know that first, if your energy mix now more than 60% is provided by the coal energy. Happen to be in Indonesia also rich of coal. So
Right.
we actually, it's convenient to have our own coal. We have the coal. But then this is not good for the environment. So when we are going to shift into renewable, and Indonesia also blessed with many potential renewable in this case, from geothermal, hydro, and so on. So the question is then how much it costs. When we talk about affordable and just principle of this climate change,
Yes.
then when we talk about affordability, whether we can afford to change the existing investment dominated by non-renewable into renewable. It will require a new investment on the non-renewable. It will retire the non-renewable. And that will create another problem of the sunk cost or the capital which is stranded and so on, the asset that is stranded. So these are all need to be constructed. Indonesia doing our homework. So we constructed all this. Okay, this is what is our power plan. This is the future demand for our energy. This is the portion of renewable that we want to add more and retire on this non-renewable. Then we start, okay, this is the universe of our energy. The question about which one we should start. When I explain this, okay, they have an idea about the path that we want to take. Now, the question regarding what is the role of MDBs? How you can play a role? They can advise us regarding, okay, when you have this plan, let's start with one example, piloting, usually just like World Bank doing
Right.
in China at that time. They have one project, it's good, then China can replicate with their own money. This is also the same thing. Okay, let's start with one pilot project. You want to retire this power plant coal-based. Owned by private sector, this is owned by a state-owned enterprise. What does it different from these two? What kind of financial calculation so that this power plant will be retired soon? For example, this power plant is supposed to still have 20 years. Can you shorten into 15 years or 10 years? How much the revenue loss from this shortening? What kind of compensation that you have to pay for the owner of this asset? Who will pay that, the compensation? Is it government? Then I will talk about my affordability, my fiscal. Do we have fiscal space to pay that? Why should I pay this? To clean up the CO2 from the air, while the carbon credit should be also claimed. So all this thing is becoming related, and that's why MDB's role is very important, because they know the global work. They also can link it to how this kind of transaction can be structured, but we also have our own idea. So this kind of thing, then we can discuss, for example, with private sector, financial institution. We talk with the philanthropy, and
Right.
they're saying, okay, I provide with the technical assistance, and we have within our own country the government-owned capacity. This is what we call it the blended funding, as well as the blended expertise,
Right.
which is, I think, is very important.
So I think that's a very clear vision of what you want from them. So President Jin, do you think, first of all, do you agree with that vision? Secondly, do you think that the MDBs today are organized and able to provide that vision? And if not, what is needed to enable them to provide that kind of support to that Indonesia and other countries, whether it's Vietnam or India or China or Brazil or South Africa, are all going to look for only on the coal issue?
I would say all the MDBs are working together even more closely over the last couple of years. Even though their specific mandate could be a little bit different from each other, but they overlap on some important theme, which certainly is to promote broad-based economic social development. For instance, if the World Bank and ADB focused pretty much on poverty reduction, we say direct intervention in poverty reduction, they still do infrastructure projects for long-term development. We focus very much on infrastructure and other productive sectors. even though we do not directly deal with poverty reduction, but we aim at lifting the people out of poverty through the broad-based economic social development. So you can say broadly, we share the main objective. And that is the basis for the management of MDBs to work together. And as you know, we have the regular heads of MDBs meetings. We are going to have it again this time to discuss some of the urgent issues. Now, I think we should have even more focused attention on the major issue, which is climate change, climate mitigation, climate change mitigation adaptation. This is something, I would say, without exaggeration, a kind of existential threat to the humanity. Existential threat is certainly a serious problem, but it also is the cohesive force of bringing us together. So my idea is we need to go on discussing these issues among the heads of MDBs, and we can work in close collaboration to deal with the clear and the present danger we are faced with. So I clearly see the focus. With regard to the clients, the borrowers of the MDBs, I can feel that there's an increasing demand for the green economy, renewables, even though some of these countries depend still very much on the traditional fossil fuel, but obviously the focus would be on the renewables. So we have a very common ground to work together. You referred to the MDBs. Should they be the platform bringing different shareholders with different political agenda to come together and focus on something important? I think it is. It's happening. Only what we need to do is to further enhance the awareness of the major shareholders, particularly major shareholders, that they need to work together in MDB as a platform for broad consultation and cooperation. And they should not be fighting. This is not the place for fighting. So we need to work together. And I think we should be pushing for that. That's why I proposed that there should be regular consultations among the MDBs. This kind of consultation should be institutionalized and focus very much on the important issue. We used to have the meetings, but sometimes the topics are pretty diffused and it's ad hoc-ish, okay? So I'm not saying that from now on, all of the MDBs should work for the same kind of projects. I don't mean that. The projects should be different, but the main objective is the same. I think this is very much important. And you raised the question of what, looking at the demand side of the kind of demand the client countries would have for those institutions. My view is, first of all, we need to listen, but not to listen passively. We need to listen, in my view, actively, which means you are listening and you will respond. You tell your clients, this is a great idea, we will do it. On the other hand, you also need to tell your clients, we do not think it's time for us to do this. Even though the idea is great, probably you're not ready, we're not ready, or probably you need to prioritize. Because often we have project proposal from the client and we think it's good, but this is not really what you need at the current moment. And you also need to balance the short-term vision with a long-term objective. So being willing to listen to the borrowing countries does not mean you just take their ideas indiscriminately. I don't think that helps, right? So all in all, I think we have a big agenda, and I think this agenda should be very much focused. And I do agree that we should try to depoliticize and coming together on the focused issues we work. And recently, for instance, during these days, we talk about the de-risking in the climate financing.
Right.
And I'm asking myself, wait a moment, de-risking, which means the private sector would be completely free of any risks. Is that realistic? Maybe not, because the private sector also has a duty to perform, right? And also, if you really want to have the private sector to play a big role, of MDBs to play big roles, depoliticizing, in my view, is more important
Than
in this
de-risking.
regard. That's right.
Okay. All right. So I want to bring in, I'm sure there are many people by now who have questions for both of you. So let's allow a bit of time for that. And I'm going to try and take 3 or 4 questions at a time. If you could raise your hand, and then I will come to you in the order in which I spot them. Who would like to go in first? There's a gentleman in the front, one there, and for now I've got 2 and 1 in the front. So let me start with that gentleman over there, please. If you could identify yourself, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. Rob Colorino with AIIC Investment. I guess, Mr. Jin, you mentioned in earlier comments with respect to private corporations or business corporations versus MDB culture. It would seem that nowadays there's a mix. Some of these private companies are very much looking at sustainability and community involvement, other type things, which are sort of MDB-like. And my question is, with respect, and also the minister's comment, how MDBs could be more commercial-oriented, looking at values, because some of these corporations or family businesses are very, very political, departmental, spaghetti-like. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Then there's a question over there. Yep.
Stanley Coburn. The world is dividing into 2 blocks, the way it did during the Cold War. Banking is now part of the blocks. This is new. You are stuck in the middle. You're going to have to make a choice, it seems. Our banks or their banks? What do you do? How will this affect you?
Okay. That's a very important question from anybody else before we come. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Tammy Gutner of American University. So first of all, I enjoyed the comparison of MDBs to kitchens and shopping malls and newspapers. That was new.
You can take your analogy, that you like, yes.
I have to think about that. So it seems like we're turning to a focus on consensus building and collaboration as kind of answers to these wicked problems that we're facing. But neither of them are easy, right? I mean, we're in a very fraught geopolitical situation, so how are we going to build consensus? We have, polarizing domestic politics in some major countries. And I'm happy to hear from President Jin how MDBs are collaborating more, but in general, collaboration doesn't work very well, right? So first of all, institutions conflate collaboration and cooperation and coordination, and often shareholders are telling the institutions to collaborate without thinking through what exactly that means and without taking into account the fact there are different institutional cultures, different institutional interests and missions, different ways of evaluating. So it just, not to be pessimistic, but these are really tough issues, and I'm just curious how you think we can make more progress on them.
Okay, so let's take those 3 and then come back for another round. So on the first one about how to make it more commercial and looking at some of the questions there, can I also add to that a footnote, which is, one of the things that many people who are looking at the MDBs today are saying is that they could be playing a much bigger role in leveraging private capital. That instead of focusing on the amounts that they lend, they should focus and be measured by the amounts that they catalyze or leverage. So again, is that feasible? Is that something that you see as part of their role, and what would be the kind of changes that would be needed to achieve that? So I might add that to the list of questions. So let me start with you first, President.
About the commercial financial institutions, MDBs. I think actually you're right in referring to the nuanced convergence in terms of objectives of public sector and private sector institutions. The private sector companies certainly still adhere to the basic principle of profit maximization. This is what their shareholders request of them. On the other hand, ESG, social responsibility, sense of that is being enhanced. And they will not do anything it takes just to make more money. So this means all these private sector companies, under the huge pressure of the public opinion, are moving towards the public institutions like MDBs. On the other hand, the MDBs are grappling with the big issue, how they can sustain themselves by continuously strengthening their capital base, doing the development work without resorting to capital increase again and again and again. So there's a subtle kind of convergence, but you do not expect them to be really the same. And if they are the same, I think there will be more damage than good. So it's, in my view, very much important in this regard. Let me stop here, maybe.
Okay, and then Srivinay.
Well,
Also, there's questions around how do we see the MDBs continuing to be a place for building consensus when the world is getting a bit more divided and fragmented?
yeah. I think on the first question on the how you are expecting the MDB to become commercialized, it's really depend on what you define as a commercialized charging price. This is definitely not, because at the same time this institution was created and the capital is free, quote unquote, in this. It is not totally free, of course. That's why there are so many political objectives on this capital, but not financial objective in this case. So it's just different objective. So in a way, I think what you try to expect in commercialization of this MDB is whether they are able to perform their operation in a way that financially becoming continue sustainable. And that's why the question about the capital adequacy framework, or whether your balance sheet using the existing capital, you've already maximizing those capacity in delivering this objective, which is becoming so diverse: climate change, poverty, gender, infrastructure, whatever. And that is exactly what now the discussion among the shareholder and the client, that your balance sheet, are they already maxed out, or there are still a room for you to do without sacrificing, for example, rating, and of course the sustainability of this institution. I think these are all already implemented, or now the process is beginning. Because the shareholder feel that when I put money, although it's not paid in, but callable, you want to know that this kind of endorsement or contribution can be maxed out within the context of political environment in which many of our citizens asking for more efficiency, effectivity, as well as accountability. On the platform of the collaboration, well, it's maybe messy, but I don't really see it that way. I mean, the way we describe that with this kind of shareholder, which is our political entity, sovereign countries, and the client is also the sovereign country, is a political. You actually can still, this institution, I really value the MDB, is a very, very important institution in terms of their existence within this global community environment, which is so messy or so complex. Within these MDBs, you actually can always come up with collaboration. Let's say when you talk about climate change, suddenly both the shareholder and client realize that climate change will create a catastrophic, devastating impact for all. And that's why then MDB can provide this platform, not only that they happen to be very convenient to have a shareholder and client, which is all countries, but also they have the expertise, investment in this, to create a certain program or project in which both client and shareholder satisfy. It's not always maximum satisfaction, but they satisfy. Oh, okay, you are now dealing with climate. Then we are going to collaborate within that. They support it, project approved. That's when we have the pandemic is also the same. This is a global threat, then okay, the MDB can provide this kind of collaboration. When we are dealing with the issue of gender, that's also another thing. Okay, that's also a good issue. Everybody agree, and then you can provide. So I don't agree with you that this collaboration is messy. It is messy and abstract and normative description, but if you're really running an institution, you actually can create that kind of thing. It is not always easy, but I think that is possible.
Thank you.
Let me pick up on this question, and also briefly on the two-block issue. Whether we are having two blocks, and that two-block or the decoupling would create problems for the financial institutions. I think the threat, the risk is over there. But so far, we do not see some major problems. Giving you the example of U.S. and China relationship. Okay, it's tense, but despite the cause for decoupling, you'll find the American financial institutions are now establishing themselves more and in Chinese market. China is opening up the financial sector, and indeed you see even more interactions between the U.S. and China in terms of the financial sector. But some people say maybe in the high tech, there could be real decoupling. I find it's probably sounds like plausible, but I still have some questions about that, whether it's really possible for complete decoupling. Indeed, competition is the most important resources for any economy. If you exclude from others, you close your door to outside competition, you will find one of these days you wake up, the others catch up, or even they surpass you. So I think people should stay calm. If the developing countries are catching up in technology, the right way is not decoupling, but to work together to compete. And that brings me to the issue of the MDBs' roles. I can tell you that so far MDBs really are working together very well. We don't see fighting among the MDBs, partly because they have the mandate specific to themselves. For instance, as I said, World Bank focused very much on social sector and poverty reduction, so do AIIB, but we focus very much on the infrastructure. And also because of the country exposure limit, the World Bank or AIIB sometimes may find it difficult to provide sufficient funding needed by the borrower. At that time, we can chip in. Now, we've been working with the World Bank Group very well since day one, in spite of the misperception that this bank was designed by China to undercut the World Bank. Nothing could be further from the truth, because you see, the shareholders are the same. Right, shareholders are the same, and they share the same objective. And so I told Jim King, the former president, and David Malpass, I said, we need to work together. You remain the conductor, you're a big brother. Give me a seat, play clarinet or oboe or violin, and I just need a seat. You keep conducting so we can make a beautiful symphony, right? This is the way we do. And even when it comes to private sector companies, I don't think competition dominates to the exclusion of cooperation. It's not true. When you talk about production chain, global production chain, what does that mean? You need to work together. You need to link together. We are doing different things, meeting different needs of the market. And only by supporting each other could we achieve the maximum benefit. So how about the same, the companies doing the same kind of business? Are they really competing? Yes, they are. Yes, they do. But still, sometimes a kind of cooperation works. I don't bother about booking air tickets in these days. But I remember the first time in 1980 when I came out to the United States, the China airline, you buy ticket from China airline and you all find not endorsable, which means you buy my ticket, you have to stick to it throughout the whole journey. Rather in this country, UA, AA, or this kind of thing, it's endorsable. You know, why should I give my business to others? But then I find it's actually really very good. Because if I buy UA, and for certain reason, I have to shift to another company, I can do it. But then another company also have this kind of thing. It's kind of cooperation because it would provide convenience to the staff and so people would buy you a ticket because they have no worries. You feel locked down in your airline. The same is about hotels. My hotel is overbooked, and I say, you know, can you take my guests? Next time, if you are overbooked, I take care of it. So even about the same kind of business, still it's possibility of cooperation, to say nothing of the vast need for cooperation among the MDBs.
Thank you very much, President. So just so now we have two more analogies to add to the newspaper and the kitchen, and we now have also the symphony and the airline, so and the hotel. So, but I think we will all be very happy when we see the symphony of the MDBs, and we discover that it's actually they who are playing it, you know. I think we're going to run out of time shortly, but it's time for, I know you had one question, Rowan, in the front, and so I'll take three quick, if you could make them quick, we'll try and get a very quick 1 minute response.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I'm Rowan Rockefeller from the Center for Global Development. This is actually a question that comes in from online, but the question is the kinds of financing commitments that are required to deal with the crisis of climate change are going to require a massive influx of financing for middle-income countries in particular. And that influx of financing might have implications for, macroeconomic stability, stressing sort of the standard guide of macroeconomic fundamentals beyond what we have seen as sustainable in the past. Could the two of you please comment on how you view that trend?
Thank you, that's very good. Scott next, I think, right next, you can pass the microphone.
Thanks, Scott Morris, Senior Fellow here. So the knowledge function, Madam Minister, that you referred to early on, I think it covers a lot of activities, and I suspect in some areas from a client country perspective, you would actually say a little less knowledge, please. So particularly the banks, how to do procurement, how to do environmental impact assessments, et cetera, et cetera. That's a difficult set of issues to navigate, I think, from the MDB side. What is too onerous? What is too process-oriented? And yet it's not really prominent in this whole agenda right now. So I wonder if you could just speak to this question.
Right. Thank you very much. So it's knowledge versus norms, in some ways. Are you sure? I think there's just one person in the back there. Quick question.
Thank you very much. Asger Garnick from the think tank Concito. Looking forward to a symphony rather than a cacophony of MDB interaction. My question is, shouldn't we broaden this request beyond a wish for the MDBs to become better at collaborating themselves, and then ask them to become, you could say, stewards of the whole international ecosystem of support and collaboration, because that's what recipient or partner countries need in their transition efforts, and that's what's needed also in the JET-B setting. It's not just about the MDBs cooperating, it's about MDBs taking responsibility for the platforms of collaboration between the private sector, the other bilateral actors that are out there, the DFIs, and the whole ecosystem of international collaborators and support. And then the question is, how do we encourage and incentivize MDBs to do that? Because that is about much more than their own lending. It's also even beyond their mobilization impact in terms of mobilizing capital. It's about their whole contribution to the transition of a country towards decarbonization in this case. So how do we create KPIs for that?
I think that's a very, very good question. All right, excellent. So now we have three questions. So you can, given the time, take your pick. I'll start you with Chairman Mulyani.
the need for financing is huge. The fiscal capacity is limited. And if the risk assessment is going to be the same, then you cannot sacrifice the fiscal sustainability for climate change agenda. Because even before you can go there to this agenda, you are collapsing first, right? So if the global community agree, assessing the risks, both financial and the climate, and how you are going to integrate within the context of credit rating, sustainability of the financial and sustainability on the environment, then you are going to be able to actually come up. And this is not easy, of course. Even for the private sector institution, when they are going to finance many of the coal retirement, they are punished because you are still financing coal, although this is retiring coal. Because in their book, there is a word coal, which is on a ESG, then you have this checkbox, you are not allowed to do that. So this kind of thing is going to a process, but I'm optimistic that with a lot of the discussion with many of the stakeholders, I think they come up with a more convergence, and don't underestimate the ambition as well as the power of many militant support of trying to overcome each of these issues. The second one, on the knowledge versus norm, well, I think some knowledge is important. For example, for a country who has coming from nothing at all in terms of their governance of the procurement, learning that kind of knowledge is important. But if it is becoming a very complicated process, like the ESG type that we are having safeguard within the bank, there are so many agendas that you want to put within this safeguard because of all your political constituent. Then you becoming just totally like a unmanageable complex of knowledge, which we don't know what is exactly what you try to achieve, while the client as well as the bank will sacrifice or suffer from that kind of situation. I think, to be very honest, this is going to be another thing in which how you are going to deal with the pressure from stakeholder on the governance of this institution is going to be very important. But I think many of this knowledge is still very important and needed. Although I also firmly believe that many of the client countries, especially emerging countries, they generate a lot of knowledge themselves. My own experience in Indonesia, every time when I was an MD in the bank, when I talk to the client, I usually use my own experience rather than the bank knowledge. And they connect because I was finance minister before, so I know exactly how difficult to make this kind of reform. This is the political sensitivity, what kind of trade-off. So they connect with that kind of knowledge. So I know that there are so many countries' experience is actually very, very important. The weaknesses, usually they are not capturing this knowledge. The bank have more staff which is dedicated in capturing the knowledge and then creating it and then deploying to the client. So you can complement with that. On the third one, what is the question?
Third one was whether beyond coordinating amongst themselves, could the MDBs become the sort of fulcrum for helping to align the rest of the system?
Well, I think it's really depend on the incentive in this case. You mentioned about the JETP. I mean, Indonesia presidency G20, and we were able during the leaders meeting announcing this JETP 20 billion for supporting Indonesia energy transition mechanism. 20 billion is a big money, although I don't know where it's coming from, which pocket in this case, but 20 billion, that attracting a lot of interest. And then Indonesia is doing our own homework, as I said. Okay, we developed this platform, this is going to be what I need from the knowledge side, technical side, financing side. These ones should be financed from the MDBs, either from bilaterals, from private sector, financial institution, philanthropic in this case, and then our own money. So how we are going to blend this one? I think with this kind of example, again, MDB has the capacity and competency to then capturing this kind of project into something that then creating common governance and then create replicable to many other countries. that is the power of all this, the commitment and the shareholder. So I will not underestimate that. Usually it's very quick. So that's why we actually kind of like using this JETP and all this ETM as actually testing the global community on the climate change related to the energy sector, right, which is very complex and expensive. So it's a kind of a very rewarding. The MDBs usually all with their big ego in this case, when it is ADB first, World Bank say, that's ADB. So they usually, I want to have my own signature in this case. So these are all, both the bureaucrat and the management, right, they all have a big ego.
Everybody wants to be the first violin.
Exactly.
Okay, President Jin, you have the last word. Couple of minutes, please. Yeah.
I think resources are always scarce, but they are always available. Economics is about dealing with the competing wants of scarce resources. Do we have money to deal with the clear present danger, the climate change? Yes, we do. Where is the money? Money is there. The issue is whether you really regard this as an imminent danger to humans. Pandemic. When pandemic hit all these countries, money came. You have to stop paying for anything else. You have to stop some of the expenditures. All the money goes to dealing with the pandemic control. It's a classic case. So no problem about that. Knowledge, in my view, the MDBs do not really give them knowledge. Because for instance, if we finance the project sponsors have engineering companies, they have the knowledge. What we contribute is to help them improve their institutional capacity. How to make the best use of the resources, to design a project, to implement project on schedule. As for the specific knowledge about the power plant, the power transmission, it's not really our strong points. So I think when we work with a client member or a corporate company to help them design a project, done it by high standards, that's already the knowledge they need. But MDBs are already working with the private sector, with the governmental institutions, with all of those stakeholders. And for instance, like the IMF World Bank annual meeting, this is the place, this is the event where we bring all these people to come together and discuss a lot of important things. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we've run out of time. We could have gone on for longer, but I'd like to bring it to an end now. And I want to thank you both for taking the time to come to this in your very busy week. And I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in thanking both of you.